Harold Mitchell sat in the luxurious confines of his hospital room, the opulence around him starkly contrasting with the emptiness he felt inside. The walls were adorned with rich mahogany paneling, and the large window offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, its glittering lights reminiscent of the wealth he had accumulated over a lifetime. Yet as he stared out at the world, he felt an overwhelming sense of solitude. The bustling streets below were filled with people living their lives, while he remained confined within these sterile walls, grappling with the harsh reality of his terminal illness. His fingers traced the edge of a polished wooden bedside table, where an assortment of medical paraphernalia lay scattered: pills, syringes, and a glass of water, untouched. He sighed deeply, the sound escaping his lips like a whispered confession. Memories flooded his mind, each one a bittersweet reminder of the life he had lived. He had everything a man could desire: wealth, power, and influence. Yet he had sacrificed the most precious connections, especially with his daughter, Sarah. It had been years since they had spoken, years filled with regret and unspoken words. "Mr. Mitchell?" A gentle voice broke through his reverie, pulling him back to the present. Emily Carter, a young nurse in her late 20s, entered the room with a warm smile. Her presence was like a breath of fresh air, a stark contrast to the cold sterility of the hospital. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, her scrubs hinting at the compassion that lay beneath her professional demeanor. "Good morning, Emily," Harold replied, his tone barely above a whisper. He forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. He was aware of how his illness had transformed him into a shadow of the man he once was, his once vibrant spirit dulled by the weight of his regrets. Emily approached him, her brow furrowing slightly as she noticed the sadness etched across his face. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, pulling a chair closer to his bedside. "Just another day in paradise," he replied dryly, glancing back out the window. "Can't complain too much, I suppose. The view is nice." "Sometimes a nice view can make a world of difference," she said, trying to draw him out. "But I can see that you're somewhere else right now." Harold studied her for a moment, surprised by her perceptiveness. Most people avoided delving too deep into his thoughts, preferring to keep their interactions light and superficial. But there was something about Emily that made him feel as if she genuinely cared. "I suppose I'm just reflecting on my life," he admitted, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "It's a lot to unpack." "Life has a way of catching up with us," she encouraged, her tone softening. "If you feel comfortable, I'm here to listen." He hesitated, weighing the risk of opening up to someone who was essentially a stranger. But there was an undeniable urge within him to share, to unburden himself of the weight he had carried for so long. "I've spent so much time building an empire," he began slowly, "but in the process I lost my family. My daughter, Sarah. I haven't seen her in years. I don't even know if she'd want to see me again." Emily's heart ached for him. "That sounds incredibly difficult," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Have you tried reaching out to her?" "I've thought about it many times," he confessed, his gaze drifting back to the city below. "But every time I pick up the phone, I picture her face, the disappointment in her eyes. I can't bear the thought of her hating me." "She may surprise you," Emily offered gently. "Sometimes taking that first step can lead to unexpected places." Harold chuckled softly, the sound laced with bitterness. "You think so? It's a long way from here to there. I might have burnt that bridge a long time ago." A moment of silence enveloped them, both lost in their thoughts. Harold's memories tugged at him, a relentless tide of regret. He could see her face, her youthful innocence replaced by hurt and anger the last time they had spoken. He had been too stubborn, too proud to reach out, and now he feared it was too late. Suddenly, an impulsive thought crossed his mind, something that had been simmering beneath the surface since their conversation began. "What if," he began hesitantly, "what if you pretended to be my daughter? Just for a day?" Emily blinked, taken aback by his request. "I'm not sure I understand," she replied, her brow furrowing in confusion. "I mean it," he continued, his tone growing more earnest. "Just for one day, I need someone to fill that role. You could help me confront this part of my life, and maybe it would give me the courage to reach out to her." "Pretend?" Emily echoed, her mind racing. She could hardly believe what he was suggesting. "Mr. Mitchell, that's a lot to ask." "I know it sounds absurd," he admitted, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. "But I'm running out of time. I need to feel what it's like to have a daughter again, even if it's just for a few hours. I want to remember what it felt like before I lost everything." Emily hesitated, weighing his request against her duties as a nurse. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw a longing that echoed her own hidden desires for connection and understanding. "What exactly do you want from me?" she asked cautiously. "Just to spend the day together. The two of us," he explained, a flicker of hope igniting within him. "We could talk, go out, maybe revisit some places that meant something to me. I think it could help me heal." She felt her heart swell with compassion, but the enormity of what he was asking weighed heavily on her. "And what if someone finds out? What if your daughter comes to visit?" "Then I'll explain," Harold replied, his voice firm yet pleading. "This is about me facing my past, Emily. I need this, please." Emily took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. This was not a typical request. It was a leap into uncharted territory. But perhaps this was also an opportunity to help someone in need, to offer him a semblance of the connection he craved. "Okay," she finally said, her voice steady. "I'll do it. Just for today." A smile broke across Harold's face, a genuine expression of gratitude that lit up his tired features. "Thank you, Emily. You have no idea how much this means to me." As she prepared to step into the role he had thrust upon her, Emily felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This day would not only change Harold's life, but perhaps hers as well. She had no idea how this journey would unfold, but she sensed that it was a beginning, an unexpected turning point that would intertwine their fates in ways neither of them could foresee. Emily Carter stood in front of the mirror in the hospital's staff lounge, taking a moment to adjust the delicate fabric of the vintage dress she had pulled from the few pieces of clothing she kept as a reminder of her mother's taste. The soft lavender hue complemented her fair skin, and the lace details added an air of nostalgia that felt oddly appropriate for the day ahead. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that this was not just a costume. She was stepping into a role that represented hope and connection for Harold Mitchell, her terminally ill patient, who had requested her to play the part of his estranged daughter for just one day. As she walked back to his room, Emily's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had no idea how Harold would react to her transformation, or if she could truly embody the role of a loving daughter. She knocked lightly on the door before entering, and when Harold turned to face her, his eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Emily," he breathed, his voice a mix of disbelief and admiration. "You look extraordinary." "Thank you," she replied, her cheeks warming under his gaze. "I thought I'd try to match the part." "Match the part?" he repeated, a smile creeping onto his lips. "You've exceeded my expectations. You look like a young woman who has just stepped out of a dream." "Just a little shift in wardrobe," she shrugged playfully, trying to ease the tension that hung in the air. "So, ready for our big adventure?" He chuckled softly, the sound echoing in the otherwise sterile room. "As ready as I'll ever be. Let's see what the world has to offer today." They left the hospital together, the bright sunlight kissing their skin as they stepped outside. The fresh air felt invigorating to Harold, and he took a moment to breathe it in deeply, savoring the sensation of freedom. Emily walked beside him, her heart swelling with a mix of empathy and excitement, both for him and for the role she was about to play. Their first stop was a charming local diner, a place that seemed to hold a treasure trove of memories for Harold. As they entered, the bell above the door jingled, and a wave of nostalgia washed over him. He glanced around, taking in the retro decor, the red vinyl booths, and the cheerful chatter of other patrons. This was where he had spent countless weekends during his daughter's childhood, sharing pancakes and stories. "Let's sit over there," he suggested, pointing to a booth by the window. Emily nodded and followed him, her role as the dutiful daughter already beginning to feel natural. Once seated, they perused the menu, and Harold's eyes twinkled with mischief. "How about we order a stack of pancakes? You know, the kind that comes with whipped cream and a cherry on top?" "Sounds like a plan," Emily replied, giggling. And maybe some coffee to wash it down? Make that 2 coffees. The more caffeine, the more stories I can share. He winked. As they placed their order, Emily could see the weight of his illness momentarily lift. They began sharing stories, laughter spilling out like sunlight in the cozy diner. Emily told him about her own childhood, how she would sneak into the kitchen to help her mother bake cookies, the flour dusting her nose as they laughed together. Harold listened intently, nodding and chiming in with questions, his eyes shining with warmth. You know, my daughter used to love baking as well, he said, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. She had this knack for making the most outrageous cookies. One time, she added too much salt instead of sugar, and we ended up with the most terrible batch. But we laughed so hard that day, it became one of our favorite memories. Emily smiled, her heart aching slightly at the thought of the memories Harold had shared with his daughter. I bet it was a disaster, but at least you made a great memory out of it. Exactly, he replied, his expression turning contemplative. Sometimes it's the little moments that matter the most. Don't you think? After their meal, they decided to take a stroll in the nearby park. The sun was high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the greenery. Harold pointed out various landmarks, each one steeped in bittersweet memories. Over there, by that old oak tree, he said, gesturing with a feeble hand, is where I taught Sarah how to ride a bike. She fell so many times, but she got back up every time with that fierce determination of hers. Emily could see the pride etched on his face. She sounds like a strong girl. She is, he replied, his gaze distant. Or at least she used to be. I wish I had been there for her as she grew up, but, well, life has a way of getting in the way. As they continued their walk, Emily felt a profound connection forming between them. She listened intently as Harold recounted stories of his past, his triumphs, his failures, and the moments he had missed with Sarah. With each anecdote, she found herself becoming emotionally invested, feeling for the first time the weight of his regrets as if they were her own. Sometimes, I wish I could go back and change things, he said, his voice tinged with sorrow. But I know that's not possible. All I can do is hope for forgiveness and the chance to make amends. Just then, they rounded a corner and nearly collided with an older man, who seemed to recognize Harold immediately. Harold, my old friend! It's been ages! The man exclaimed, his face lighting up. Harold's face broke into a wide grin. Frank, it's wonderful to see you! As they exchanged warm greetings and hearty backslaps, Emily felt a pang of anxiety. She stood to the side, unsure of how to fit into this reunion. Frank's gaze shifted to her, his eyes narrowing slightly as he scrutinized her. And who's this lovely young lady? He asked, his voice full of curiosity. This is my daughter, Emily, Harold said, the words rolling off his tongue with surprising ease. Emily's heart raced as she forced a smile, the weight of the deception heavy on her shoulders. Nice to meet you, she managed, feeling a mixture of guilt and obligation. Daughter, huh? She looks just like you, Harold. Must take after her old man. Frank chuckled, and Emily couldn't help but join in the laughter, even as her heart ached at the fib. The conversation flowed easily, filled with shared memories and laughter. Harold played along, recounting stories from their shared past, but Emily's heart ached with the realization of their deception. While Harold seemed rejuvenated, she felt a growing sense of unease. As they parted ways with Frank, Harold's eyes sparkled. That was refreshing. I haven't felt this alive in years. Emily nodded, a bittersweet smile on her face. I'm glad to see you so happy, Harold, but I can't help but feel a little guilty about pretending. Guilty? He asked, his tone shifting to something more serious. You've given me a glimpse of what I've missed. For just one day, I had my daughter back. That's worth a little deception, don't you think? Emily felt torn. On one hand, she wanted to support Harold and help him heal. On the other, the weight of their fiction pressed heavily on her conscience. The day had brought them closer, but at what cost? As they continued their walk through the park, the sun began to set, casting long shadows that mirrored the complexities of their day. As they settled back into the sterile confines of the hospital room, Emily felt the weight of the day pressing down on her. The laughter and connection they had shared outside those walls now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the reality of Harold's illness. She busied, herself adjusting the IV drip, her mind racing through the emotions that had surfaced while they pretended to be father and daughter. Harold, however, was far from defeated. He leaned back against the pillows, a hint of a smile still playing at the corners of his mouth. "Emily," he began, his voice a mix of fragility and newfound strength. "I can't remember the last time I felt so alive. Today was special." Emily turned to him, surprised by the intensity in his gaze. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. It felt good to see you smile, Harold." He chuckled softly, a sound that seemed foreign to him. "You know, I've spent so much time locked away in my own mind that I forgot how to connect with the world. It's like I've been living in grayscale, and you, my dear, you've added color." She felt a warmth flush through her, but the undercurrent of sadness remained. "It's easy to lose sight of what matters," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "We all have our regrets." "Regrets," he echoed, his brow furrowing as he stared at the ceiling. "I have plenty. My daughter Sarah, I've pushed her away for so long that I fear it's too late to make amends." The mention of Sarah hung heavy in the air. Emily had sensed the depth of Harold's pain, and it made her heart ache. "You said she's a successful entrepreneur living abroad. Have you thought about reaching out to her?" Harold shifted, his expression clouding with uncertainty. "I've thought about it a lot. But what can I say? Hello, I'm your father, and I've messed everything up? It feels insurmountable." "Maybe she's been waiting for you to say that," Emily suggested gently. "You never know how she might respond. Sometimes just the act of reaching out can open the door to healing." He turned to her, his eyes widening slightly. "You think so?" "I do," Emily affirmed, feeling a surge of hope for him. "You have to take the first step. It might be uncomfortable, but it's the only way to start rebuilding." A flicker of determination ignited within Harold. "You're right. I've spent too long hiding from my mistakes. It's time I face them head on." Emily smiled, encouraged by his resolve. "And I'll be here to support you. You're not alone in this." As they continued to talk, Harold found himself revealing more about his past, moments of joy and sorrow intertwined. "Sarah was everything to me when she was young. I was a different man then, full of dreams and ambitions. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what truly mattered. I pushed her away, thinking that wealth would fill the void." "What happened between you two?" Emily asked softly, sensing the raw emotion in his voice. It's a long story," he replied, his gaze drifting out the window. "There were misunderstandings, arguments. I was too focused on my business, and she needed a father. I thought she would understand, that being successful would make her proud. But that's not what she wanted. She wanted me." The regret in his voice was palpable, and Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. "You didn't know then what you know now." "No, I didn't," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "But maybe I can still change the narrative. Maybe I can reach out and let her know that I'm still here, that I want to be part of her life again." "Do you have her number?" Emily asked, excitedly leaning forward. I think I have it somewhere," he replied hesitantly. "But what if she doesn't want to hear from me?" "Then at least you'll know you tried," Emily insisted. "Sometimes taking that step is the bravest thing you can do." Harold nodded slowly, contemplating her words. He felt a strange sense of hope blooming inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. "You really believe she would want to hear from me?" "I believe she deserves to know that you care," Emily replied, her voice steady. "And you deserve to try. Life is too short to leave things unresolved." As the conversation flowed, Emily couldn't help but feel a connection to Harold that transcended their roles. It was as if they were both seeking redemption, her from her unfulfilled dreams, and him from the wounds of his past. "Tell me about yourself, Emily," Harold said, shifting the focus back to her. "You've listened to my story. Now I'd like to hear yours." She hesitated, unsure of how much to share. "There's not much to tell," she began. "I'm just a nurse trying to make a difference. I've always wanted to be a writer, but life has a way of leading you down different paths." "A writer?" Harold's interest piqued. "What do you want to write about?" Emily's heart raced as she considered the question. "I've always been drawn to stories of connection and healing. I guess I see so many people in pain, and I want to give them a voice. I want to show that even in the darkest times, there's a glimmer of hope. Sounds like you have a gift, Harold said, his eyes shining with admiration. You should pursue that dream. Don't let anything hold you back. She smiled, touched by his encouragement. It's easier said than done. I have bills to pay, and writing feels like a distant fantasy sometimes. Sometimes the most important things require a leap of faith, Harold replied, his tone earnest. You've already shown me that today. Emily felt a swell of gratitude for the bond they were forging. You've inspired me, Harold. Maybe I just need to take that leap. As the hours passed, they continued to share their dreams, their regrets, and their hopes for the future. With each word, the father-daughter dynamic they had created felt more genuine, filling the space with warmth and connection. Finally, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow through the window, Harold took a deep breath. I think I'm ready to reach out to Sarah tomorrow. I'll call her and we'll see what happens. Good, Emily said, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. You're taking a brave step. He looked at her, his expression softening. And I couldn't have done it without you. You've become a part of my life in ways I never expected. Emily's heart fluttered at his words, and she felt a connection that went beyond pretense. I'm glad I could help, Harold. It means a lot to me, too. As they shared a moment of silence, Emily realized that their lives had intertwined in ways neither of them could have anticipated. They were both seeking healing, both yearning for connection, and in that shared journey, they had found something precious, understanding and hope. As the sun peeked through the drawn curtains of Harold's hospital room, illuminating the space with a soft golden light, he took a deep breath, gathering the courage he needed for the call he was about to make. Emily sat beside him, her presence a reassuring balm against the weight of his long-held regrets. Are you ready? She asked gently, her voice steady yet filled with warmth. She could see the flickers of anxiety dance across Harold's face, the lines of worry etched deep on his forehead. It had only been a day since they had shared laughter and stories, but now the reality of their situation loomed large. I think so, Harold replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He gripped the phone tightly, his knuckles turning white. What if she doesn't want to talk to me? Then you'll just have to accept that, Emily encouraged, her eyes meeting his with unwavering support. But you won't know until you try, and I'll be right here with you. Taking a deep breath, Harold dialed the number he hadn't called in years. The ringing seemed to echo in the sterile room, each beep a reminder of the chasm that had grown between him and his daughter. Emily watched him intently, her heart racing in sync with his, wishing she could take away his pain. Hello? The voice on the other end was cold, clipped, and distant. Sarah, it's me. Dad, Harold stammered, feeling the weight of the word hang in the air like a heavy fog. Dad? The disbelief in her voice was palpable. What do you want? I wanted to talk to you. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to explain. Explain? You think you can just call me after all these years and explain everything away? Her tone was sharp, filled with years of hurt. You walked out of my life. You chose money over family. What could you possibly say that would change anything? Harold's heart sank further with each word. I understand, Sarah. I've made terrible mistakes and I'm so sorry. Sorry? Is that supposed to fix everything? She interrupted. You should have thought about that before. You have no idea how much you hurt me. Emily could feel the tension in the room, the air thick with unspoken emotions. She reached out, placing a comforting hand on Harold's back, hoping to convey some strength through her touch. Please, just give me a chance to explain, he pleaded, his voice trembling. I've been sick for a while now, and I don't want to leave this world without at least trying to make things right. There was a long pause on the other end, and Emily could sense the internal struggle within Sarah. Sick? What kind of sick? Why should I care? Because it's the truth, Harold said, his voice cracking. I have a terminal illness. I want to reconcile before it's too late. I want to know you again, to be part of your life. What does that even mean, she asked, her voice softer now but still filled with skepticism. You think one phone call can erase the past? I don't expect it to, he replied, his heart racing. I just want you to know that I regret everything. I've been a fool. I've been living in a gilded cage, surrounded by wealth but utterly alone. And I miss you. I miss my little girl." The silence stretched between them like an unbridgeable gap. Emily held her breath, hoping for a breakthrough, but fearing that it might not come. "Why should I believe you?" Sarah finally said, her voice trembling. "You've had years to reach out, and you didn't. Why now?" "Because it's too late for excuses," Harold admitted, tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. "I'm running out of time, Sarah. I don't want to die without letting you know how much you mean to me, even if it's too late to fix everything." "Maybe it is too late," Sarah replied, her voice now a whisper. "You don't get to decide that." "I know," he sighed, feeling the weight of despair settle heavy in his chest. "But I want to try. Just, please think about it. I'll be here if you decide you want to talk more." With that, the call ended, leaving Harold staring blankly at the phone, his heart aching with the weight of rejection. Emily wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into a comforting embrace. "I'm so sorry, Harold," she said softly, feeling tears welling up in her own eyes. "You were so brave to reach out." I thought maybe she'd hear me out," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But I guess I was wrong." "It's not your fault," Emily reassured him, her voice steady. "Healing takes time. She may need to process everything. It's a big moment for her, too." "But it hurts," Harold whispered, the vulnerability of his situation emerging. "I've done so much wrong, and now I'm faced with the consequences. I don't want to die alone, without her forgiveness." "You're not alone," Emily said firmly, pulling back slightly to meet his gaze. "You have me, and while we can't change the past, we can still create something beautiful moving forward. You deserve that." He looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You've been more of a daughter to me than I could have ever imagined. Thank you for being here." Emily smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You've taught me a lot too, Harold. About regret, about love, about second chances." As they sat together, the silence felt less heavy. It transformed into a shared understanding, a bond forged through vulnerability and honesty. Later that day, Emily was sorting through some of Harold's belongings, trying to help him organize things in his room. In a drawer, she stumbled upon a small, worn journal. Curiosity overtook her, and she opened it, revealing pages filled with Harold's neat handwriting. Each line was a testament to his remorse, his reflections on his estrangement from Sarah, and his unexpressed feelings of love and regret. "Harold, look at this," she called out, holding up the journal. "It's like a window into your heart." He turned to her, a flicker of interest crossing his face. "What do you mean?" "There are so many thoughts in here, feelings you never expressed. It might help you to write a letter to Sarah. Pour your heart out. You can tell her everything you've kept inside, all the things you wish you could have said." His eyes lit up with the suggestion. "You think so?" "Absolutely. It's a chance for you to share your truth, to show her how much she means to you despite everything. Sometimes putting pen to paper can help clarify what's in our hearts," she encouraged, her voice filled with warmth. "I don't even know where to begin," he admitted, glancing back at the journal. "Just start with what you feel," she said gently. "You've been so honest with me. Allow yourself to be honest with her too." With that, Harold took the journal from her, flipping through the pages as if searching for inspiration. "I'll try," he said, determination creeping back into his voice. "For her sake, I'll try." Emily smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope for both of them. Perhaps this was the beginning of healing, not just for Harold but for Sarah as well. As he began to write, she felt a sense of purpose wash over her, realizing that their journey together was far from over, and that they were both on the cusp of discovering what it truly meant to forgive and be forgiven. In the quiet of the hospital room, the sound of pens scratching against paper filled the air. It was a sound that signified not just words, but the first steps toward reconciliation. And as Emily watched Harold pour his soul onto the pages, she felt a renewed sense of connection, not just with him, but with the very essence of family and the power of second chances. As Harold Mitchell sat at the small wooden desk in his hospital room, the sterile walls felt less confining, and a sense of liberation swept over him. Emily Carter perched on the edge of the bed, a notepad resting on her lap, her brows furrowed in concentration. The faint hum of machines provided a rhythmic backdrop to their quiet collaboration. Okay, let's start with the opening, Emily encouraged gently, tapping the pen against the notepad. You want to express how much you've missed her. Harold nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he picked up the pen. His heart raced with a mix of apprehension and relief as the weight of his unspoken feelings began to surface. How about, Dear Sarah, I've spent so many years regretting the distance between us, and I don't want to waste another moment without reaching out to you. Perfect, Emily said, her eyes brightening. You're being honest, and that's what matters most. He paused, letting the words sink in. I feel like I'm writing a letter to a ghost, he admitted, a hint of sorrow lacing his voice. Someone I once knew so well, yet who feels like a stranger now. Emily leaned closer, her empathy palpable. But this is your chance to bring her back into your life. You're not just writing to her, you're opening a door. Taking a deep breath, Harold continued. I regret the choices I made, the moments I missed. I was consumed by my own pursuits, thinking that wealth could fill the void. He glanced up at Emily, his eyes glistening. I was wrong. The room fell quiet as the weight of his confession hung in the air. Emily could see the tension in his shoulders begin to ease, as if each word was a small release of the burdens he had carried for far too long. What else do you want her to know? She prompted, sensing his vulnerability. I want her to know that I love her, he replied, his voice steadier now. Despite everything, I never stopped loving her. I didn't know how to show it. Emily nodded, jotting down the words as he spoke. That sounds like a good place to go next. Maybe you could tell her how proud you are of her accomplishments. Yes, Harold said, a spark igniting in his eyes. She's built a life for herself, and I want her to know that I admire her resilience. I wish I could have been part of that journey. The pen moved across the paper as Emily wrote down his sentiments. You're doing great. It's important to be open. Acknowledge your mistakes, but also express your hopes for the future. He took a moment, contemplating the next lines. I want her to know that I'm here now and that I'm willing to listen. I want to understand what she's been through, to be there for her. Exactly, Emily encouraged, her heart swelling with admiration for the man before her. This letter could be the beginning of a new chapter for both of you. As Harold penned his thoughts, his face transformed. The lines of worry began to soften. He was no longer just a wilty man grappling with regret, but a father striving for redemption. I never thought I would feel this way again, he murmured, almost to himself, his voice filled with disbelief. Emily smiled softly. You deserve this moment. You're taking a step towards healing. But as Harold poured his soul into the letter, a sudden heaviness settled in Emily's chest. Her mother's health had taken a turn for the worse, and news of her condition weighed heavily on her mind. She had tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing instead on Harold's needs, but the looming reality was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Harold, she began, her voice wavering slightly, I need to tell you something. He looked up, concern etched on his face. What is it? It's about my mom, she admitted, her heart racing. She's not doing well. I've been trying to stay strong for you, but I feel torn. Harold's expression softened, and he set the pen down, his attention fully on her. Emily, you've been incredible throughout all of this. You don't have to carry the weight of my burdens alone. Your family comes first. I know, but I want to be here for you too, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't want to abandon you when you need support. You're not abandoning me, he reassured her, his voice gentle yet firm. You're being a good daughter, one who cares about her family. I understand. You need to take care of your own heart. Emily nodded, grateful for his understanding. Thank you for being so kind. It's just hard when everything feels so overwhelming. It is overwhelming, he acknowledged, his gaze penetrating. But you have the strength to navigate both worlds. Just be honest with yourself about what you need. She took a deep breath, grounding herself in his words. You're right. I need to figure out how to balance everything. And being here for you has taught me so much about connection and vulnerability. Harold smiled softly, a look of warmth spreading across his face. And you've taught me as well. I never anticipated that a day spent with a stranger would lead me to confront my past and hope for a future. With renewed determination, Harold picked up the pen once more. Let's finish this letter, shall we? As he continued writing, Emily's heart swelled with pride for him. Each word was a testament to his growth, to the man he was becoming. But beneath her pride was a twinge of sadness as she thought about her own family situation. "I just wish I could be in two places at once," she confided, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to support you, but I also need to be there for my mom." Harold paused, looking up at her with a knowing expression. "Emily, sometimes we have to make tough choices. But remember, it's okay to ask for help. You're not alone in this." A lump formed in her throat as she considered his words. "I appreciate that more than you know." Once again, Harold resumed writing, pouring his heart into the letter, channeling his hopes and fears into ink. "I'm so grateful for your presence in my life," he said softly, his focus unwavering. "You've shown me what it means to connect." Emily felt her heart swell with emotion. "And you've taught me how powerful forgiveness can be. This letter is more than just words. It's a bridge to healing." With a final flourish, Harold signed the letter. He held it up, a sense of accomplishment radiating from him. "I think I'm ready to send this." "Let's get it in the mail," Emily said, her voice filled with encouragement. "You've taken a huge step today." As Harold prepared to send the letter via registered mail, he turned to Emily, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I feel more alive than ever, Emily. You've helped me rediscover a part of myself I thought was lost forever." "And you've made a lasting impact on my life too," she replied, her voice sincere. "I'll always remember this day." In that moment, they shared a poignant look filled with understanding and compassion. They had both faced their vulnerabilities, and in doing so had forged an unexpected bond that transcended their individual struggles. As they stood there, a quiet strength enveloped them, a promise of hope for the future that lay ahead, both for Harold and for Emily as she navigated her own challenges. Emily Carter rushed through the hospital corridors, her heart pounding in her chest. She had received an urgent call from Harold's doctor, a voice tinged with concern that sent a shiver down her spine. As she approached Harold's room, her mind raced with the possibilities of what could be happening. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, her breath catching at the sight before her. Harold lay on the hospital bed, his pallor more pronounced than ever. Tubes and machines surrounded him, beeping softly, but the sounds felt ominous in the stillness of the room. His eyes were half closed, and he appeared semi-conscious, a fragile shadow of the man who had shared laughter and stories just days before. Emily's heart ached at the sight. She rushed to his side, taking his frail hand in both of hers, feeling the warmth that was slowly slipping away. "Harold," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's me, Emily. I'm here." He stirred slightly at the sound of her voice, his eyes fluttering open. For a fleeting moment, clarity returned to his gaze, and he squeezed her hand weakly. "Emily," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "You came." "Of course I came. I'm not going anywhere," she assured him, forcing a smile despite the tears that threatened to spill over. "I was worried. The doctor said, well, It's all right," he interrupted, his voice strained but steady. "I've had a good run, haven't I?" He looked around the room as if assessing the memories that lingered there. "But you've changed everything." She felt a lump in her throat, her emotions swirling. "You've changed everything for me too," she said, her voice thick with feeling. "You've shown me what it means to connect, to really connect, and Listen to me," he interrupted again, his tone urgent now. "I need to tell you something important." His grip on her hand tightened slightly, as if he were drawing strength from her. "You've become the daughter I lost, Emily. In this short time, you've filled a void I thought would never be filled." Her heart raced at his words, a mixture of warmth and sorrow flooding through her. "Harold, you're not lost. You're right here with me. We can—" "No," he cut her off, his voice growing weaker. "You need to hear this. My real daughter, Sarah. She deserves to know the truth." He took a deep breath, struggling to find the words. "You see, there's something about you that I never told you." Emily's stomach twisted in knots. "What do you mean?" "I had an affair many years ago," he confessed, his eyes locking onto hers with a desperate intensity. "That affair, it resulted in you. You're her half-sister." The words hung heavy in the air, a thunderclap of revelation that shattered the fragile peace around them. Emily felt the world tilt beneath her feet, confusion washing over her like a tidal wave. "What? No, that can't be," she stammered, her heart racing as she tried to process the implications of his revelation. "Yes," he whispered, each word a struggle. You are Sarah's half-sister. I never knew. I never knew you existed until now, and I don't have much time left." He paused to catch his breath, his frail body trembling with effort. "I regret everything, Emily. I regret not being there for either of you." Emily stared at him, her mind racing. The man who had become a father figure to her in the absence of her own family was somehow tied to her biological family in a way she had never imagined. "But how can this be?" she managed to ask, her voice shaky. "How do you know?" "I've kept secrets for too long," he replied, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "When I had that affair, I was lost in my own world of wealth and ambition. Sarah, she was the light of my life, but I made choices that cost me dearly. I pushed her away, and now, Emily, you've stepped into my life unexpectedly. You've brought me joy when I thought I was beyond redemption." She felt the weight of his words pressing down on her, the realization that her life had been irrevocably altered in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. "But I'm not her," she whispered, almost pleading with him to take it back. "I'm not Sarah. I don't even know her." Harold smiled faintly, a bittersweet expression twisting his features. "You may not know her yet, but you can. You can be the bridge, Emily. You can help her understand me and my regrets. Maybe, just maybe, you can find a way to mend that broken relationship." He coughed gently, a sign of his declining strength. "Harold, please don't talk like this. You can't leave me. Not now," she pleaded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I need you to be strong, Emily," he replied softly. "You've always been strong. You have the heart to reach out to her. I believe in you." The gravity of his words sank in, and Emily felt a surge of determination rise within her, mingled with despair. She wanted to fight for him, to keep him here, but she also felt the weight of his legacy pressing upon her shoulders. "I'll do it, Harold," she vowed, her voice firm despite her trembling heart. "I'll find Sarah. I'll let her know everything. I promise." He nodded slowly, his expression a mixture of relief and sorrow. "Thank you. That would mean the world to me," he rasped, his breath becoming labored. "Just tell her I'm sorry. Tell her to forgive me." Emily nodded, her heart heavy with the task ahead of her. "I will, Harold. I promise." As he lay back against the pillows, his eyes began to drift closed, and she felt a surge of panic. "Harold, stay with me," she urged, squeezing his hand tighter. "In my heart, I'll always be with you," he whispered, his voice fading. "You're family now, Emily. Remember that." With those final words, the light in his eyes dimmed, and the machines around them emitted a series of soft, mournful beeps. Emily's heart shattered as she realized the truth of what had just unraveled before her. She was not just the nurse who had stepped into Harold's life. She was now part of a complex tapestry of family ties that needed to be untangled. As she sat there, clutching the letter to Sarah in her hands, tears streaming down her face, she felt the weight of the world shift upon her shoulders. Harold's legacy was now her own, and as she prepared to face the daughter he had lost, she understood that her own journey was just beginning. The connections they had formed were deeper than she had ever realized, and it was her turn to rewrite the narrative that had been so painfully crafted by the past. With a heavy heart and a newfound sense of purpose, Emily knew she would find Sarah, and she would tell her everything. The truth would come to light, and in that truth, perhaps healing could begin.